What's up, guys? As you see, we are going to be discussing ancient China. Ancient China is one of my favorite topics. One, because it has a really cool history, and two, they have really fun sounding names. So hopefully you enjoy it just as much as I do. Now, the first section is all about kind of the first couple of dynasties that rose, the geography of ancient China, as well as some of the belief systems of ancient China, like Confucianism, for instance. But it's going to be great. Hope you're excited because I am. All right, guys. So, the geography of ancient China. This is one of the early maps of ancient China. If you see the outline here, the big bold outline, that's the size of China today. However, where civilization began in ancient China is where you see in the green. Now, there are certain geographical spots that you should be aware of. Ancient China was a very isolated society, almost like Egypt, where it was able to it didn't really have a lot of influence from outside. Isolation means kind of alone. All right. Now, one reason why was because in the north you have the Gobi Desert. Okay. The Gobi Desert is a vast, massive desert, which really prevented a lot of invasions from the northern, from the North Asia, all that area. Okay. Well, you also have different cultures as well. We talked about the Hong Shan culture and the Tian Shan culture when we talked about culture hearse in the very beginning of the semester or the year, but don't really stress about that. But what's important here is certain locations. For instance, you have the Huanghe River. Now, the Huanghe is actually not pronounced as Huanghe, it's pronounced as Huanghu. Huanghu doesn't sound as great as Huanghe. It's also called the Yellow River. It is an extremely large river. Another important river that you had was the Changjiang, which is also called the Yangtze River. Now, the Changjiang is the third largest river in the world, which is kind of pretty cool. But in between those areas, you have the river valleys. That is where society really began. Um, Society began in that fertile area. It was, I guess, in a way, the breadbasket where people would farm, grow grain, grow rice, and it was very important. And that was really where all the future empires, the future cultures, the future dynasties really began to spread from. But these are the main important aspects. Of course, it's also connected to the ocean. So you have the Yellow Sea, you have the East China Sea. All right. Uh, so there was trade routes, but remember, in the beginning, it was mostly isolated. The first dynasty in ancient China, the very first, was the Shang dynasty. Now, the Shang dynasty, remember, what is a dynasty? We learned about this a while back ago. A dynasty is a line of kings that usually come from the same family. Well, the Shang dynasty developed and organized the people in the river valleys. But what they also did is they developed a system of writing with literally over 3,000 characters. Now, do you know how many characters are in our alphabet? About 26. 26. They had 3,000. That's that's flipping crazy. Uh, So anyway, they ruled for a while, but one of the difficult things about ancient China is their rules did not last as long as places around the world. Well, they had a hierarchy. On the very top, remember, hierarchy is kind of how the classes are broken up. Okay, on the very top, you would have a king. Okay, under them, the second most important are your warlords, the people that would rule, kind of like the provinces. Well, provinces don't really exist then, but the people that would kind of rule little areas, and they would help create the army. Now, later on, this kind of led to chaos. And under all of the lowest of the low are the farmers. They were on the bottom of the list. Well, this eventually helped destabilize things. There eventually became wars, and warlords tried to get into power, and the Shang dynasty weakened over time. But we're going to talk about that because in the next part we talk about the Zhou dynasty. All right. Well, anyway, early religion. Um, Early religion was important in the Shang dynasty. They had many gods and goddesses, but they also had spirits. For the most part, spirits were the most important. Now, the difference between a god and a goddess and a spirit is a spirit isn't exactly a personal being. A tree could have a spirit. A river could have a spirit. Um, an ocean or a sea could have a spirit. A blade of grass could have a spirit. But they could help a person kind of become better in a way. But another important thing was oracle bones. One main thing in ancient Chinese civilization was what an oracle was. An oracle could help divine or predict the future. They could give you guidance in life. They could tell you how to live and tell you what to do in certain situations. What an oracle bone was it could have been a tortoise shell, or it could have been literal bones with certain cuts on them. And with the turtle shell, for instance, they'd put the turtle shell or the tortoise shell over a fire and it would crack, and they would read the cracks and be able to read into your life. If they had regular bones, right, they would just kind of throw them. Now, they were never really human bones. They were mostly animal bones. But anyway, it was a very important part of the society. So just keep that in mind when you hear about the Shang Dynasty. Yeah. So the Shang Dynasty didn't last for a very long time. I mean, a couple hundred years. But eventually, the Shang Dynasty starts falling apart, and another dynasty takes its place called the Zhou Dynasty. Zhou Dynasty, not the Zhao Dynasty. It's one really cool thing I like about Chinese language. Things don't sound like the way they look. And that's why I really enjoy language, but that's a whole another point. But anyway, the Zhou Dynasty. The Zhou Dynasty overthrew the Shang Dynasty when it weakened, just like I mentioned. However, it was China's longest ruling dynasty. It ruled for 800 years. Now, that might sound like a long time, but if you think about it, they ruled from 1050 to 400 BC. Now, there's a lot of time after that. So what was society like that? Oh, my goodness, I cannot speak right now. What was society like after the reign of the Zhou Dynasty? Well, we'll talk about that in just a little while. Well, anyway, the Zhou Dynasty developed this idea called a mandate of heaven. And the mandate of heaven is this: the king was essentially chosen by the gods to rule. And if you went against the king, you were essentially going against the gods. Now, most of the common people believed that the king was actually divine himself, and this idea lasted for well past the Zhou Dynasty's ruling. So that's one of its big successes. It also explains this thing called the dynastic cycle, which is the pattern that begins to happen, of the rise and falls of the Zhou kings. All right, Zhou king. Well, the fall of the Zhou. Now, Zhou ruled for about 500 years. They had a strong central government. What I mean by central government is it had a large system of governors and officials to help kind of rule the smaller provinces and the smaller areas, right? One person can't rule everything. He has to appoint people to help him rule. Well, that worked for a while. However, the Zhou Dynasty made a huge mistake. They broke up their area into different, I guess you'd almost say, smaller kingdoms that were supposed to pay homage to the king, right? Well, these kingdoms became too independent and too powerful, and they began to fight each other for power. This was known as the Warring State period. Now, this period lasted for over 200 years. Constant warfare. There's actually some cool video games about it called Dynasty Warriors, my favorite video game of all time, probably. But it's a button mash game. Probably wouldn't really appease to you. But it was really just about a battle of kingship and a battle to rule them all. All right. So, Chinese philosophies. Some of these philosophies actually became very religious because these philosophies develop into different gods and goddesses. But the first major Chinese philosophy is called Confucianism. Now, Confucianism was developed by this guy named, you guessed it, Confucius. Sweeneyism. The religion of being mighty. That would be pretty epic. I'm sorry. If that was lame, I blame my writer. So Confucius. Confucius was born around 551 BC. Now, Confucius was born at a time when the Zhou dynasty was falling apart, and so he began to see the chaos. So what he wanted to do is he wanted to fix this chaos and create a system that is in harmony, that has peace. Now, how he did this was he promoted certain ideas. One was education. If people aren't educated and they don't know how to live life, then life isn't going to go very well. When I mean by education, I don't mean learning about science and math and well, social studies would have been important because social studies is the most important class. But it wasn't really about education in the sense of you need to learn and get a degree. It was education and more of how to live life, the proper way to farm, the proper way to rule, the best way to be a citizen of ancient China. Well, one important part of that is duty. I'm not talking about duty. I'm talking about the duties that we have to do in society. So, for instance, let me give you an example. What's the best way to raise a kid? In America, you have many different ones. You have certain parents that might say, well, if a child does something, you beat them, like spank them. I'm not talking about abuse here. Some might say, well, let's not hit them. Let's just yell at them or put them in timeout. Why don't we take away their stuff? Okay. Then another family might be like, well, you know what? My kids are my best friends, and if I respect them, they will learn themselves. Well, those type of three ideas can be kind of chaotic if everyone raised their kids differently. Well, Confucius picked up on this idea. He's like, there needs to be a defined way to raise a kid. There needs to be a defined way to rule a country. There needs to be a defined way that a husband treats his wife. There needs to be a defined way that a wife treats their husband. And everyone needs to follow these ideas. There is no option. Okay. Now, his idea in this was that if everyone follows their roles, there's not going to be chaos. There's not going to be greed. There's not going to be war. Now, that's kind of idealistic or in a perfect world, but this is what Confucius saw. Well, when Confucius died, he believed that he was a failure. Confucius looked at everything and he saw it wasn't working. However, his students and his disciples, the people that studied under him, believed that what he had was something very important. So they got together and wrote down all of his teachings and his philosophy. And that was written down in the Analects of Confucius. Now, it eventually became a religion. Well, two other important ideas are Taoism and legalism. Taoism emphasized living in harmony with nature. Do you look at nature? Do you see ants massacring other ants? Do you see monkeys killing other monkeys or mass murdering? No. So we should follow the example of nature and just be at peace. Just live in society. Don't cause harm. Be at peace. Then you have oh well, Tao means the way. But then you have legalism. Legalism's hardcore. Legalism was like, look, people do not care about morality. They care about food. So you need a strong government. If you mess with that government, destroy those people. Legalism was very hardcore. They believed that the stronger the government, you need to whip them in shape because people are wicked and lazy. I mean, imagine if you didn't have to go to school. Would you go to school? Probably not. What would you do? Play video games, eat. Well, legalism was like, no. You need to do what the government says. If you do not, you will be punished. Well, these are the different type of philosophies in ancient China, and some of these philosophies are still apparent today. Oh yeah, and you got Han Feizi, not Jay-Z. I forgot to mention him. Sorry. He kind of developed the ideas of legalism. Legalism was around before him, but he kind of developed them and wrote them down. Kind of put down these ideas in writing around 260 BC.